Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. A public safety warning has been issued as toxic drug deaths in BC rise to 7 per day. What more can be done to make sure the drug supply is safe? And the BC government's attempts to solve the housing crisis now includes legislation to push for more densification, especially near certain transit hubs. But will it actually lead to more affordable housing? I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Now, the BC Coroner Service has issued a public safety warning as toxic drug deaths in the province rise to 7 per day. According to preliminary data, illicit toxic drugs are suspected in more than 200 deaths in November. The warning issued this week urges people not to use drugs alone. It recommends those who are using drugs to do so in the presence of someone who can administer naloxone and first aid and who can call 911. Now, joining me for more on this is Daniel Snyder. He is with the Langley Overdose Response Community Action Team. Hi there, how are you?
Good afternoon, Amy. Thanks for having me. I'm well.
Oh, thanks so much for joining us. So the BC Coroner Service warning says unregulated drug deaths in the winter months have historically increased over numbers from, say, the rest of the year. What are your own observations about, some of the challenges of this time of year? It can be difficult for a lot of people.
Well, I think the weather is a factor here. People are more likely to be isolating in the winter months, and those who are using drugs are much more likely to be using indoors and alone. I know that was my pattern of use, which took place prior to the toxic drug poisoning crisis, but we're seeing increase in deaths every winter. Cold temperatures, economic stress is obviously heightening things right now. Supply chains are always changing in terms of the illicit market. Speculate on how many people are impacted by seasonal affective disorder and may pick up some substance use or increase their substance use somewhat during the winter months. So.
And it's not just, the winter. What about, the holiday season that is so particularly difficult for people? There's a lot of, stress or anxiety or loneliness. How does that play out for many users?
Well, 7 years into this crisis, I think that we have collective trauma in our society as a result of so many people dying. The numbers are just overwhelming. 7 people every day in BC. The fallout left behind of loved ones, family members, moms and dads, brothers and sisters. These people are grieving in ways that many of us cannot understand and relate to. And so the change in we just need to be more supportive for these people, considering and aware of exactly how much suffering people are going through, and that one of the responses that people will have when they're suffering is perhaps to try and cope with those feelings and emotions the best way they know how. And substance use is a component of that for many people.
Right. And the warning urges people not to use alone and to make sure someone trained in certain emergency procedures like naloxone is present. But in reality, how realistic is this?
I think people are fatigued with this crisis.
Yeah.
7 years is a little long for a public health emergency. Perhaps a large part of the general public is simply accepting this as status quo. The warnings have been incessant for 7 years, and yet things are ongoing. And then when we look at individual users and their patterns of use, their habits, their rituals, I think of my own history with drug use. I exclusively used alone, locked behind closed doors, well aware of the stigma that I was putting on myself, the way I'd internalized stigma and the judgment that I anticipated from loved ones and from society in general. And then, literally experiencing the stigma that people direct at those who use drugs, which is so often really rather hypocritical. We pretend in this country as though alcohol is not even a drug. We talk about it in ways like it's somehow different from other substance use, other than the fact that we have a regulated market for alcohol. people who drink it are drug users.
Hmm.
And really, they should come to terms with that reality that drug use is a significant part of our society. And really, the fact that this crisis is continually conflated with addiction is a problem. When we have conversations, we are consistently moving into discussing the need for more treatment, which I agree with, and is a serious issue. There's a lack of access to support services for sure. But even if we dramatically improved our addiction support resources, improved access to treatment tomorrow, we would still have a toxic drug crisis going on. We would still have a large cohort of people who use drugs but
Hmm.
do not qualify as having a substance use disorder, dying. And so, you know, we somehow need to find a way to stop conflating the separate issues, to talk about toxic drug poisoning and how we're going to address that. And then, yes, to talk about addiction and better ways to address that, such as introducing national standards
Right.
for treatment in this country.
Yeah, and also, to go back to the point of alcohol, there is a safe supply of that. To a certain degree, it's regulated, and people know what they are buying and what they're getting, where that isn't the case with a lot of drugs. So the warning is aimed at anyone using substances bought from the, quote unquote, illicit market. Do you think this messaging is reaching people purchasing those sort of so-called party drugs?
I mean, we need to be persistent regardless if it's reaching them or not. Hopefully, we're reaching loved ones and those who care for people who are using drugs, and the message is being passed on. But I'm also acutely aware of the denial and the protection measures that individuals who use drugs can operate in. Believing that they aren't at risk, or that they somehow have some inside knowledge on how to protect themselves, or not really considering the weight of the stigma and shame that a person in that who maybe is caught in that lifestyle and caught in an addiction might be experiencing. They're not reaching out for help, nor do they want to expose themselves and be vulnerable to put themselves in a situation where, hey, I'm going to use drugs, please check on me. That might be an overwhelming ask of some people. So,
Absolutely.
being persistent and finding new and creative ways for us to continue to spread this message and have these conversations, even though it feels like an endless thing that we're doing right now.
It does seem endless. It has seemed endless. Is that, I mean, you sort of mentioned earlier, we keep hearing these same messages. Is there a danger that people are just tuning it out, that they're just accepting that this is what's happening and not working towards solutions?
I suspect so. I mean, we don't openly discuss these issues, and there's a denial as to the reality of how much drug use is happening. And when I say we don't openly discuss these issues, I'm talking maybe in a more interpersonal relationships and family relationships.
Right.
How honest and vulnerable are we being with one another, and the awareness that there is still that judgment and moralizing really out there about drug use, and a hypocritical moralizing really in large part is part of what's prohibiting us from really tackling this and moving forward in significant ways. A great amount of the harm that is being caused is the very nature that the drug market is illicit. Its illicit nature, prohibition, exacerbates the harms that people who are using these substances experience. And obviously, that's the reason that the drug supply has become such a disaster. 7 years ago, the demand for fentanyl was very low. It wasn't really the opioid of choice for most who use that opioids, but rather profit mongering and supply led changes are what brought fentanyl into the drug supply. And in essence, this could be summarized as the iron law of prohibition in action, something that we experienced well over 100 years ago, more in the States, when they attempted to prohibit alcohol. And we saw a rise in toxic, poisonous, illicit alcohol as a result.
It's been 7 years since they declared the toxic drug crisis a public health emergency. I guess, what action would you like to see from governments finally?
I mean, really, we got to build bridges and stop with the political rhetoric and pandering to our bases on both sides of this issue. It's not a either or approach. it's not about harm reduction or about increasing recovery and treatment supports. It's about doing it all. We have millions of people in this country, many, hundreds of thousands of drug users, and each and every one of those people is unique, and the approaches and services and tools that will help them are wide and varied. So we need to embrace all approaches. I'm alive and well, not because simply of going to treatment and embracing recovery, but also because harm reduction supported it and met me where I was at various times of need. And so it shouldn't be debated. It shouldn't be we shouldn't be approaching this ideologically. The moralizing needs to come out of the conversation and really just embrace a public health evidence-based approach that prioritizes life. And that's what harm reduction is about. It's prioritizing life with the hope attached to it that people who are struggling can improve their lives. And that change does happen, but it happens incrementally over time. It doesn't generally happen from one visit to a treatment center or other approaches which are all part of a solution working together. So that's, I'm hopeful, and I'm also encouraging people to build bridges and support one another in the process.
That does help. Daniel, thank you so much for taking time with us today. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Stay safe. Daniel Snyder is with the Langley Overdose Response Community Action Team.
All right.
Now, you might hear shouts of Lou in the next couple of days, and that is because Roberto Luongo, the former Canucks goalie, will be inducted into the Ring of Honor by the Vancouver team tonight. He says he plans to do a lot of reminiscing while he's back in the city, and earlier today, he spoke about what Vancouver means to him and his family.
It was the most important stretch of my career. I think it was when I was in my prime. We had a great team. We were in the playoffs. We made a run to the Cup. Played in the Olympics in the city, which is unbelievable when you think about it. It's a huge, huge part of my life. Always will be.
Hi, Roberto. Congratulations again. During those difficult times towards the end of your time as a Canuck, would you ever have envisioned that you'd be having a night like this a decade later?
I mean, the difficult time wasn't at the end. I thought it was pretty was pretty happy at the end. Everything was great, but yeah, you never know, right? You don't really think about that stuff when you're in it. I guess you always want to leave a good impression that. The goal when I played, I always wanted to be the best. Didn't matter what year it was, whether it was my rookie year or even my last year when I was 40 years old. I was still striving to be the best goalie in the league. That was just the way I was built. So some fantastic years here in Vancouver. Like I said before, I think those are the years that I was in my prime. So I'm glad that that it is getting recognized because this city holds a special place for me.
Former Canucks goalie Roberto Luongo, and that was from earlier today. So what's your favorite Luongo memory, and what did he mean to the team? You can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, Karen Larson was at a press conference earlier today where you saw Luongo spoke with reporters, and she joins me now. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Amy.
So pretty exciting day all around.
I think so. When you talk about this city's passion, maybe the province's passion,
Yes.
The Vancouver Canucks are it, and Roberto Luongo was one of the biggest stars in the hockey world that ever passed through this city. So it should be really fun tonight, and it's a well-deserved honor. A little bit of a debate around this because really a lot of people think Ring of Honor is not enough for Roberto Luongo and what he did for the team, took them to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. all the awards he won along the way, and really that they should be retiring his number 1 jersey. You know, fans can get into that and debate that, but it should be a wonderful night for him and his family tonight.
Very exciting and nice to see somebody, be honored and lifted up. What was what was he like? What was sort of the mood in the room today? Because, as they mentioned, there at times was tension. There wasn't always the easiest.
Oh, no. And he had such a fascinating career. I mean, he came in and he really turned the Canucks around when he was traded from Florida to Vancouver. Vancouver Canucks had a long history of being a bad team, with
You're allowed
with
to say it.
instances of
Yes.
going to the Stanley Cup, many years apart. But in between those times, not a lot to cheer about. And he really turned the franchise around when he was traded here in 2006. I want to say that's correct. Yeah. And, all of a sudden, it seemed like we could have a winning team here. And it actually came to fruition
It's true.
as well. And he also had a really interesting personal journey. Hockey players, you forget how young they are. He would have been like 26 or 27 when he came to Vancouver, but you also got to sort of see him mature in his public persona, also through his social media alter ego on Twitter, which developed midway through his career and kind of changed the dial a little bit on how people thought about him.
It definitely changed. And was there? Correct me if I'm wrong, but people didn't know it was him at first, did they?
This was a wonderful thing about it because we remember he had been named captain, which was unheard of for a goalie to be named captain. He had signed this huge contract, this 12-year, $64 million contract. And and so the weight of the captaincy was, this contract. He was a very serious person to interview in the dressing room after games and after practices. And he, was always being asked, of course, as a captain, comment on the team and how it was doing. And I think that stress really showed. And then all of a sudden, this Twitter thing started happening, and no one was sure it was him at first because the Twitter picture is a silhouette of a goalie with a question mark in it. The Twitter account was called Strombone or Strombone1. You can look it up what that means in the Urban Dictionary. I'm not going to say here. And it was funny, and it was so funny, and it was a side of Roberto Luongo that people in the media and in the public for sure hadn't seen because he was bearing the weight of the team on his shoulders all the time, and it really became sort of a lovely like I said, alter ego to what he was. And I'm not saying he's a very serious hockey player, and he took his job very seriously, but he also had this outlet where he could be funny as well, and so it really worked in his favor.
It did, and I think it made people realize that he was more than just a hockey player, that there was something there. Because
real person too.
Exactly, but being a goalie in itself, incredibly stressful with a lot of pressure, but then to be captain, like what role was he playing in the team while he was here?
Yeah, I don't think that was such a great decision on the Canucks' part. I mean, they'd given him this big contract, and I guess, I don't know, maybe his agent thought it was a good idea, because you can't really be, first of all, goalie is such a lonely position. Yeah. You've got the 5 skaters out there, and you've got your line mates. You're goalie, you're the guy, you're right? Last line of defense. So much pressure all the time. It is true that you see the game maybe a little bit differently, but then, of course, you have to, there's just so many things to consider. So, the captaincy didn't last.
No.
For very long, I want to say a little bit over a year, and then he handed it back, and that was an interesting experiment, I guess. But in the end, what he should be applauded for tonight is just his spectacular play. And like I said, he is the Canucks' all-time best goalie in wins, in goals against, in shutouts, and a few other. He's 3-time Vezina nominee, Hart nominee, won the Jennings Trophy for fewest goals against in the league, I think, with Corey Schneider one year. And he will be going into the Hockey Hall of Fame. One day. Remember, he also won the Olympic gold medal on the ice at Rogers Arena.
I certainly
in
do
2010.
remember.
He was in the net for that. And so this is kind of interesting because he will be going into the Hockey Hall of Fame eventually. And he'll be in the Canucks Ring of Honor as of tonight.
Oh, it's very exciting. And we would love people to share if they have any memories of, Luongo, if you saw him at a game, if you made that play, if he, maybe impacted you or your friends to get into hockey or to play goalie. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Karen, I'll ask you about that. Like, in terms of the impact that Luongo had on not just the Canucks, but on the game itself. there was a hockey coach on the early ed with Stephen Quinn this morning referring to the Luongo effect.
Oh,
so, you know, what exactly was that?
Yeah, it was real. And I saw it because my two children, my son and my daughter, were both in hockey at the time when Luongo was at his best in Vancouver. And you did see this influx of kids wanting to be goalies, not just in boys hockey, in girls hockey as well. And they'd all show up in their Luongo jerseys at the rink for their minor hockey practices. And it was real, Amy. It was absolutely real. And isn't that great? You know, I was talking to Dan Murphy, who's the host of the Canucks on Sportsnet today, and he was reminding me how Kirk McLean also wore number 1, fantastic goalie for the Canucks as well. And then, you know, the Canucks were kind of a goalie graveyard for a long, long time until Luongo came around in 2006. And so that did spark a great interest in the position that hadn't been there previously.
That's always nice to see. And we sort of referred to it earlier that things were not always, you know, rosy between Luongo and the team. There was tension at times. You know, how did that sort of play out by the end of his time? You know, were relationships, you know, bad? Is that all in the past now?
I think a lot of that is business too. Sure, there was times when Corey Schneider came in and Corey Schneider challenged him for the number 1 job and got the number 1 job. That was a huge sort of topic of debate, you know, who's the number 1 goalie. And I don't know if people remember, but they did a story for TSN, Schneider and Luongo together, where they wore Thing 1 and Thing 2 shirts. And in the end of this, and it's done tongue in cheek, James Duthie was the one who produced it, but it is spectacularly funny. And it ends with Luongo, I think, strangling Corey Schneider, you know, so they could actually make fun of the rivalry that they had. But you're allowed to do that in sports. In sports, you're allowed to want to be the best. You're allowed to say you want to be number 1.
You're
allowed
to
try and push the other guy out of the way because it's competition and it's within that crucible of that. And so there were times when he wasn't happy. And he spoke about that a little bit today too, because I don't know if people remember another quite memorable moment when he came out and he said about his 12-year, $64 million contract that it sucked. My contract sucks is the words he used. He was wanting to be traded, and there were trades in the work at that time, but the contract was the problem for him being traded to Toronto, apparently.
How so? Just the amount of money they would have to pay out?
It just the way it was structured wasn't going to work for the trade. And so, it's interesting. It was very interesting hearing him talk today about his reminiscences. Anyway, I think the city loves him, and I think he loves the city. So,
absolutely. And I think that's, you know, I think when he left, a lot of people thought maybe there was bad blood and that he wouldn't, you know, think kindly on his time. But it does appear like there is a great affection for Vancouver still.
Yeah. Well, the prime of his career was in Vancouver.
Exactly.
He had a long career. He started in Florida. His best days were in Vancouver. He ended in Florida. Yeah. So really happy for him and good for his family as well, because now he's in management with the Florida Panthers, who are playing here tonight. Hence, you know, this was announced a year ago, I think, when Florida was in town. And so the Canucks are getting a lot of good PR out of this for, you know, because we talked about it a year ago and now here it's actually happening now. Again,
All right. Last question. Do you think they should retire his jersey?
Oh boy. You know, I would say yes. When you look at the other jerseys that have been retired, he's as meaningful to the team as any of those guys.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. Yeah, do it, Canucks.
All right.
You need to do it.
Okay. We'll see what happens. But certainly going to be paying attention tonight. It sounds like it'll be lovely.
It will be great.
All right, Karen, thanks so much for stepping in and explaining things. I was CBC Vancouver's Karen Larson. And coming up on the BC government's attempt to solve the housing crisis now includes legislation to push for more densification, especially near certain transit hubs. But will it actually lead to more affordable housing? That's coming up right after the news with David Ball.
This is the CBC News from Vancouver. I'm David Ball. A Surrey woman is being honored after she saved her 18-month-old son before being shot and killed in a mass shooting in Texas last week. Sabrina Rahman was 24 years old. She was walking in her neighborhood with her son in a stroller when a gunman shot and killed a handyman in front of the house on Tuesday. He then turned to her. She is being remembered as a hero. And the Vancouver Canucks are welcoming Roberto Luongo in the club's Ring of Honor today. He'll become the 8th player in the franchise history to receive the honor. He played with the Canucks from 2006 to 2014 and set a number of team records and established himself as one of the world's best goalies. But he says his time with the Canucks was special. And construction is underway on a new healthcare research center in Vancouver. The massive building will have a combined floor space of about 370,000 square feet. Premier David Eby took part in a tour of the facility and says that it will be used for cutting-edge research in the development of new medicines and treatments. It's expected to open in 2027. And drivers are being warned to expect major delays on the Coquihalla Highway between Merritt and Hope. Drive BC says the highway is closed south of Comstock Road due to a vehicle incident. Vehicle recovery efforts are already underway. There is no word on when the highway will be open. Snow has been falling on that stretch of highway overnight. And now a look at the BC weather from Environment Canada. As mentioned, there is snow in the interior. Environment Canada has issued snowfall warnings for the North Thompson and North Columbia regions, and there will be accumulations up to 15 centimeters. On the north coast, high to 7, cloudy today. For the Peace, a mix of sun and cloud today, minus 14. In the central interior, mainly cloudy, high of minus 2, and Boundary and Kootenay, high near 0. Here in Metro Vancouver, Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, periods of rain ending this morning, then mainly cloudy, temperature steady, near 7. And back to you, Michelle. We'll be back with more news in half an hour.
And thank you, David. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Now, if you were to think about that one issue that sort of crisscrosses all others and affects just about everyone in BC, housing likely comes to mind. And the BC government's attempts to solve the housing crisis now includes legislation to push for more densification, especially near certain transit hubs. Now, if passed, the legislation will mean cities must designate transit-oriented development areas, called TOD areas, near transit hubs with minimum heights and density. In the weeks since the announcement, some concerns have been raised around whether more density will mean more affordable homes. And so we're asking you, what impact would densification have on your community, and what are the pros and cons? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining us now, Andy Yan is director of the City Program at SFU. Andy, thanks so much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
So what's the hope for this plan for more density? What is the end goal here?
Well, I think the hope for this plan is that it will bring forward a stock of new affordable housing for British Columbians, and in particular, I think in certain areas that are located near transit areas.
And what do you think the results might be from this plan?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think that it's one through which it's something that we still have yet to really kind of see in terms of its integration with various municipalities. The implementation, I think, is something that I think some have kind of seen in terms of theory, but yet there are still, I think, some ongoing questions around practice, around the fact that you have this legislation coming in from the province and how it might be integrated by the various municipalities across the province.
And in terms of affordability, would that be part of the density plans, that there would have to be a certain amount of affordable housing, within the plans? Because just building something doesn't mean people will be able to afford it, obviously.
Well, that's one of the tremendous challenges, is the fact that it's very difficult to build new affordable housing. And you could take whatever definition of affordability might be, but it's given the cost of labor, of materials, of land, that there is this tremendous challenge in terms of development of affordable housing in many parts of British Columbia and, of course, in Metro Vancouver.
How much can we look to Burnaby's Metrotown area, their condo developments, sort of as an example of what we could see? It's right in this transit hub. I guess Brentwood as well would be another example of these hubs.
And I think that you present two interesting stories around high density, transit-oriented development. I think in the case of Brentwood, you really see a type of development through which takes advantage of where it is in terms of its connections to a SkyTrain station, as well as I think a very well designed, particularly around Brentwood Station area, in terms of the integration of services with a mall on top of residential. But yet, I think with Metrotown, it really you certainly see an increase in the number of units. But I think beginning particularly in the early teens and late aughts, that there was, I think, a cautionary tale in terms of not only transit-oriented development, but transit-oriented displacement, that you actually saw a loss of affordable units, that many of these new condominiums replaced several three-story walk-up buildings that were rental. So I think that this is one of the ongoing concerns that I know I certainly have had with this strategy in towards the issue of transit-oriented displacement, and how 1 in 3 renters in Metro Vancouver live in these areas, these newly designated areas, through which their security of tenure may be in certain cases quite secure, but in other cases precarious, and now made even more precarious, I think, meant unintentionally through this legislation.
Right. There's that danger of, I guess, the so-called sort of renovictions. We do have a call I'd like to bring into the show now. Brendan in Vancouver. Brendan, hi. Thanks for calling in.
Hi. I just want to say I don't think that so basically the question was whether increasing population density, like requiring minimum height of buildings or something around city centers and stuff like that, whether that's going to create affordability as well. And I would just say, well, no, it's not, because the developers only want to build if they can charge a high price for what they build. You know, it's the same situation. Like, why hasn't anybody built like a train or something? Why can't I visit my family in Vanderhoof in the north of BC? It's the same situation, you know?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Brendan. And Andy, as he mentioned, this issue of the land being so expensive that they build these, and once again we have it available to only the 1% of society, and it's not addressing all the people that desperately need that affordable housing situation.
Indeed, and I think that is actually one of the missing opportunities that occurred with this new zoning
How so?
and heightened density. That it didn't necessarily have designations towards purpose-built rental or non-market development. That I think that was certainly, I think, an opportunity that could have been done in terms of this new zoning requirements by the province to the municipalities, much less the offering of right of first refusal. That it's really the purpose-built renter developers or the non-market developers that could then have given the kind of first rights to purchase this new height density and to develop those types of projects.
Andy Yan is director of the city program here or at SFU, and he's been my guest this half hour. And we're asking, what impact would densification have on your community? What are some of the pros and cons that you see? Call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, Stephen Shepard worries about, when it comes to densification, is the loss of trees. He is director of the Collaborative for Advanced Landscape Planning and a professor emeritus at UBC. He focuses on climate change and the role of trees and forests. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming in and speaking with us.
Happy to be here.
So this is a whole other issue with densification. You build things, you need to take things away, and quite often, that can be trees and that tree canopy. What impact can building more and smaller homes have on the tree canopies here?
Well, it can be pretty significant depending on how it's done. So those trees provide a lot of benefits. We think of it as a complete urban forest, so it's the trees, but other kinds of green infrastructure around, pervious area and shrubberies and things like that, which provide cooling and stormwater reduction, which reduces flooding, air pollution, many, many benefits and ecosystem services, as we call it. But things that really protect communities and help them weather, the storms and the heat waves that we've seen here in Vancouver.
Well, and those are just the two examples I was going to bring up to you. It's been a huge sort of pendulum swing the last couple of years between these extreme heat, these extreme rain, even snow events. So, what can it mean for the environment when you do take away this protection and this canopy?
Well, it's a loss of that sort of natural air conditioning function that those trees provide, and especially in places like Metro Vancouver, where there's a lot of existing mature trees. If those get threatened or removed by building and construction or redevelopment, as is commonly the case already, then those protective elements sort of get reduced, and that can translate to increased mortality for vulnerable people during heat waves. It can cause more climate change damage in the neighborhood, and so there's a real risk of the loss of resiliency, and kind of going against some of the other government policies that are set to reduce carbon emissions and improve that sort of adaptation.
Andy, I'll go to you. Do you think there needs to be more sort of consideration of the trees and the green spaces when we're looking at building these new, more dense areas?
Certainly, and I think first thing is that I think for listeners, they should definitely look up Professor Shepard's work. It is remarkable work in terms of visualizing and understanding the local effects of climate change in metropolitan Vancouver and British Columbia. But I think that this is actually one of the unintended consequences when you kind of hear the mantras of cutting red tape. Well, often what that means is cutting trees. That the first thing that goes are typically landscape reports that go into assessments in terms of the impact of what a new building might have on the existing landscape, which exactly leads into the cutting down of trees. And I think that again, this is an element that I think could have been, sharpened in terms of the requirements of green infrastructure, the enhancement, or certainly the utilization of existing green infrastructure, as opposed to just a focus on just height and density, which I think have an element towards the discussion of developing more housing, but yet at the same time, I think the complications in terms of what we're facing in terms of climate change and the need for climate action is something that I think is definitely an open question here.
Thank you. And Stephen, I mean, what are some of the effects that this will have in the face of more climate change and more heat events in the future? Where will we see these sort of repercussions?
Well, I think particularly with the small-scale multi-unit housing strategies, which are a lot of the existing neighborhoods in many cities in BC, you're going to see a fairly significant change over time with loss of this green infrastructure, unless the policies are enacted in such a way that it's designed so that we save, in other words, there's some constraints built in and there's some trade-offs. Because I think one of the risks of the policy is that we will lose a whole bunch of things, biophysical benefits, biodiversity, et cetera, but also mental and physical health. And that can be really important for maintaining people as a resilient community over these upcoming shocks.
Well, and in the past, heat events that we saw, it was the people that were in these small apartments that didn't have access to, maybe proper ventilation or air conditioning. They were the ones that were, that were really suffering the most, and it was the most deadly of situations for them. I'm going to take in a phone call now from Alan in Nelson. Hi, Alan. Thanks for joining us.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, what are your thoughts on, these plans for densification? And I understand you're from the Nelson area, so what are things like up there?
Well, I'm a mid-level developer. Kind of my sweet spot's kind of been buying small, maybe 50-foot residential lots and building, duplexes, maybe a single family, and trying to, just build a home over the course of the year and sell it at the end. And I find that there's so much going on with this bill, and in there is trying to find a way to make housing more affordable for people. And I find I have to defend myself and developers a lot in this way, because it's just like, what you said earlier, it's just the cost to construct dictates really how much you have to charge at the end of the day to sell these units, because you can't borrow huge amounts of money, employ all these people, build these big buildings, and then, basically work for a wage over the course of a year. It's just not worth it. And if you want guys like me to keep trying to build houses to give people homes when, there has to be a profit there.
Right.
But I've always said, like, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I'm not the guy that I don't like having to charge, $700,000-$800,000 for half duplexes. But part of the problem in there is with the current zoning, when you're only allowed to put a certain amount of dwellings on a parcel of land, your land costs are only able to be divvied up by the amount of dwellings you sell. So, in my opinion, this whole moving the goalposts and allowing more buildings on city lots and possibly close to the transit lines and stuff, that's going to allow me to recoup my profits over more sales as opposed to recouping my profits over lesser sales, which I think will allow me to get my prices down. I want to try and build places that people can afford so I can sell them easier and faster and move on to the next project and not have to build projects that cost so much and only two per lot, and then I have to charge enough money to make it worthwhile, which puts me in a bracket of buyers that, frankly, there aren't a lot of them out there.
And I would assume in Nelson, as with many areas in BC, that the housing is an issue. There's not enough supply for an incredible demand, raising the prices. But one thing in your area is you don't necessarily have these opportunities to build these big transit hubs. What are some of the things that you would like to see, in your area that, could make things a bit easier?
Well, I think it all starts at the zoning level.
Okay.
That's why this whole next move really interests me. We're dealing with these interest rates and borrowing costs. Again, have added huge extra layers of overhead on these projects. With a forecast for maybe those leveling off in the next year to 2 years, and us trying to find ways to build houses a little more cheaper, then it's just gonna, allow guys like me to keep doing what I'm doing and to find ways to not have to build super expensive places where I'd rather just build more places instead of 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, huge townhomes. I'd rather build 4 1- and 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, smaller places and sell them for, let's sell a nice $450,000-$500,000 nice condo in town here. That's as much as that's an insane amount of money. It's a lot more realistic than what people have to pay in places like, Vancouver or Squamish for the same place that I'm building here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for calling in and providing that insight. I'll just read an email that we have from Ruth, and it says, I live in Chilliwack, and I would love to see more densification around city centers. If I could live close to shopping, transit, and schools, our family could go down to 1 car. We would save money and gain time. Andy, I'll throw this one to you. We're making these sort of transit hubs. Do we also need to make these sort of, city center hubs where maybe it's not around transit, it's around walking, it's around being able to get to everything just in a couple of minutes?
I think that that's certainly the idea, and I think that a lot of folks have talked about the 15-minute neighborhood where you'd be able to access the retail as well as commercial needs that you would deal in terms of a daily basis. But I think that also is an element that's missing from this legislation, is really the mandate for complete communities. That I think as you begin with this kind of growth in terms of densification, in terms of residential, there's also, I think, similarly the need for a mandate for commercial retail services to be near these new, if you will, town centers. That I think that this is really, I think it's a principle, I think, through which actually has been around for a long time in planning in British Columbia and certainly in metropolitan Vancouver around town centers, and to kind of, I think, leverage that new densification with transportation as well as amenities. And I think that this is really an important element to realize that density in and of itself is not a bad or a good thing. It's the fact that it's density through which need supports, that it's a series of amenities, of support systems that I think really can make population density, housing density thrive, and the people living in these units thrive too.
I will talk to you again, Stephen, about the trees. I kind of keep going back to it, but Is it possible to maintain, the presence of trees, not just decoratively though, that provide this benefit, this cooling effect? Is it possible to keep that in the sort of forefront while also pursuing densification, or do we have to have a bit of a trade-off?
Yes, it's entirely possible, but it has to be done the right way. We call it smart density sometimes. It's not maximizing density so much as increasing density, which makes a lot of sense in many situations, as Andy says, but how you do it. And there are good examples like Arbutus Walk in Vancouver, or some of the retrofitted areas that people live in throughout Metro Vancouver, where they've actually already retrofitted single-family homes. So there are many good things in this policy that's trying to do, but we need to build in much tougher standards on things like green infrastructure that improve livability and help people avoid a pushback, because there could be citizen pushback if you start to see this urban old growth being lost and trees and nature. It's important to people.
Very, very much so. And Stephen, is there anything that you would want communities to keep in mind when they are pursuing these plans to, create more density? What's something you would recommend to them?
Well, I think preserving, recognizing things like tree root zones, especially for existing trees or where new trees are being planted, and being able to manage those. So important standards that could be built in, they're referred to in the documents on the site standards, but they're not. It's very flexible and it's very loose language. And I think I and many other municipalities are worried about what they will be forced to do, and how much discretion the developers and the designers have. And I think we need those standards on things like setbacks and sort of coverage areas, and how much pervious areas where water can drain in and not flood, things like that really need to be built up. Some scenario analysis, local scenarios. You can do it on your own blog if you want to say, how might this look? Can we take back some road space? Things like that, if space is really a limiting factor.
Okay, and just obviously thinking outside the box. Are we at a crisis point though, where this has to be much more important in sort of the list of priorities when planning and developing for these spaces?
Well, I think so. There's a real risk that we will lose some of the significant amount of the existing canopy that we're relying on, and government targets are to increase canopy levels, and it's a good chance they'll go down rather than up between climate change and redevelopment without the right structures and constraints in place.
We do have another call that we can get to from Lisa in Powell River. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, calling in from Cassette. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, I'm an urban planner, and we just wrapped up engagement in a Lower Mainland municipality. I'll leave it unnamed. Where we spoke with, it was equitable engagement. So we spoke with newcomers and English language learners about their concerns for this climate action plan. And they're resonating what you're talking about on the show. They're experiencing a loss of highly valued green space in favor of denser development. And then we've also done some work around extreme heat, and we're learning that, with the removal of the canopy, that mostly it's seniors who are isolated who are at greatest risk of dying in those scenarios. And then there's this dichotomy where we're hearing from older white property owners who don't want more traffic to their neighborhoods. So there's this piece about whose voices are being heard in this as well.
It's fascinating that I think you could go anywhere in the province and you'll probably hear people making the same argument. They need more housing. They don't want to give up the trees. I guess I would come to you with your, Andy and Stephen, with your final thoughts. Does this legislation, are we on the right track, or do we need to do more and do it, much more quickly?
So I kick off?
Sure.
Well, a couple of things I think the government should think about. Currently, there's no provincial urban forestry strategy. There's almost no capacity to look at urban forestry at the provincial level, and that's why it's not reflected in this document, hardly at all. So that's a big hole, and there's lots of resources at UBC and elsewhere with the urban forestry programs that exist to pull in some of that expertise. And the other thing is to do some scenario studies to develop some of these better constraints and the guidelines that they're hoping to put out.
Okay. Andy, we just have a couple of seconds. Anything you quickly want to add in?
I think that it's certainly a start. I think that there is still further, I think much more deeper details in terms of, I think, housing policy, in terms of housing demand, supply, and finance that the provincial government still needs to pursue. I think that it goes into tenant protection. It needs to actually work with what's already on the ground, the things that we need to value and treasure and to protect, and then also those that we can change and build upon.
Thank you. Thank you both for being with us. Stephen Shepard is a director of the Collaborative for Advanced Landscape Planning and a professor emeritus at UBC. And Yan is director of the City Program at SFU. Now, many of us are getting festive, and turns out some of our furry friends are getting into the holiday spirit too. Some East Vancouver residents say they're losing bulbs on their outdoor string lights to bushy-tailed thieves. And it turns out squirrels are the cute little culprit. They're gnawing on the cables and running away with the bulbs.
Came home one day and looked in our cameras, and I said to my husband, I think our light bulb's missing. He was like, no, it's not. And I said, yeah, I remember one. So we looked through the feed and noticed the squirrel popping in and just chewing off the light bulb. We didn't believe until we saw it, because last year when it happened, we thought someone came in and cut them, but we don't know for what reason. And then we opened the door and looked down, and like, holy, the whole line was missing light bulbs. Then another friend said, oh, check your Facebook feed. Looks like it's happening around our neighborhood. And sure enough, when I logged in, I'm like, holy smokes, we're not the only ones.
Earlier in the year, we noticed a couple of them missing. And a friend that lives down the road had suggested that maybe it was the squirrels. And then it felt like within the week, they were all gone, like 100 feet of string lights. And so we bought all new lights and put them up. I think my husband was gonna kill me. I bought like a decoy owl. It was my mission to have these lights for the summer. We were like spraying like natural rodent deterrents, like just trying anything to get them to not take our lights. And then it was fine for a couple of weeks, and then we went away for 4 days, and we came back and they were pretty much all gone.
Well, we're hanging a lot of lights and things outside of structures, so there's just more visibility for these things to chew. Usually when it happens, it's a lot more discreet. It's inside an attic or wiring that might be there. I mean, you will hear of car ignition wires and things of that nature getting chewed as well. And, you know, for the sake of recycling, we'll cover those things in soy-based products as well, which doesn't help, you know, and so basically they'll find those, they'll have a good purchase, and then they'll chew those. Squirrels will take and steal and nest with things as well. So, you know, from light bulbs to wedding rings, I've found all sorts of interesting trinkets that squirrels have decided to thief.
I mean, it's so funny. It's annoying, but I think even rehanging them, there was a bit of a joke to it because I knew they weren't going to last.
Tough times, I guess, if they're stealing light bulbs. You know, they should have learned their lesson from last year, because you can't eat them and they're big compared to nuts.
We'll just have to see what the squirrels come up with next. That is our show for today. My thanks to everyone who called in and joined the discussions. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also listen to the show again on the CBC Listen app and watch us on demand on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. I'm Amy Bell. I'm in for Michelle Elliott. She'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for listening and for watching.